I think the initial point that you made, that it's so critical to share the why. And when you're sharing that why, it has to be simple. So I think that strategy casket visual, maybe simplified. What are we really doing here, guys? Like, folks, what are we doing here? And there's that one visual that people can point to and say, this is what we're doing. And it's like this simple articulation of something super complex. And then you connect that visual to, okay, now what does this mean to you in your day to day? And how does this lead up to that? So I love that. And then what I really, really like what you said earlier was that when you're going into these ambiguous situations where there's a lot of complexity, a lot of chaos, and people are walking with their, I'm going to sort of throw this in there. They didn't say this, but people are walking around with their heads cut off, headless chickens. Is you sort of start engaging people in conversations and you start identifying what is the problem behind the problem, what are the true challenges by understanding them. And this could also look like a coffee chat. This could look like, right? And then what you do is you aim for quick wins. And by doing that, you're showing getting to value quick and proving that, yeah, there's value in doing this. And now you have the support of the executives and even the people that you're working with. So to get that win and to get that buy-in, you're following like a really nice, simple step-by-step sort of framework of engage in conversation, understand the challenges, and get them some quick wins so that you get that buy-in for the bigger chunk of whatever that might be, if that is the case. You know, that image of the galaxies? Everybody's talking about this.
Yes.
It looks beautiful, man.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard this before from, all these spiritually evolved people, but they keep talking about this thing we've heard from Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And then what we can hear from when you read Ramayana, you read Vedas, there's another Babaji, Abdul Baba Shivanand, Brahma Kumaris, all of them, like they all talk the same thing in different words. But when I saw this image, I was like, now NASA is like finding this thing out, or from this telescope, that there's this huge galaxy with so many other, like the entire space is so huge and there's so many galaxies. Yet what that telescope has captured is worth the grain of sand. And we, while growing up in our culture, we've heard this so many times that the entire universe is in the grain of a sand, right? So that's what resonated so much with me. And there's another thing. We humans, we have such a huge ego. I, me, myself. And when I was looking at this picture, I was reading this, that resonated with me. All the thoughts were coming, all the lessons that we've heard were coming. And I was like, they all say, look at yourself. What is the size of your existence? If this grain of sand worth of space has so many galaxies, within that must be planets, must be other existences. Similar to our side, right? If we flip the camera on our side, we will be like the minutest part, not even visible on that space. And on that is our solar system. In that giant solar system is our Earth. And what am I? What is Isha in comparison to that? What is my existence? So when we are in the boardrooms, when we are talking to our friends, we are talking to our relatives, we are talking to our colleagues, so many times we have conflicts. And many a times the reason of the conflict is ego. I, me. How can that person say this to me? And then suddenly there's a realization, what am I really?
So wait, are you like spiritual person?
Yes, I would call myself somebody who's a seeker, who's on a spiritual path.
Are there any specific things that you believe in? Because, like, there's like this, the world is sort of divided. They're like, there's people who are religious, or on the other side of that spectrum is like, actually, the extreme would be fundamentalists. And on the other is like atheist or whatever that looks like. And then there's somewhere in the middle, there's like people who are like, I'm spiritual. And it's like this trendy, fashionable thing to say. And it's like it's like, I've heard a analogy. It's like religious laziness. It's like you're being lazy about not committing to any one thing. And it's like I don't know. These are just things I've heard. I don't know how true these are, but
My perspective would be a little different than that. The way I look at spirituality is not about a particular religion, not about being atheist. An atheist could be spiritual too. On the other side, a spiritual person cannot be an atheist either. So it's like a conflicting concept in its own self. But the way I look at spirituality, Paul, is one, understanding myself and deep within, like understanding my own being, and then being that good human in every single day, in every single aspect. And when I say good human, it's my intentions, how I show up every single day for every single aspect of my life. And then how do I get better than what I was yesterday? So to get to that point, yes, you might, like one might be listening to somebody who's much more further along in that journey, who's sharing their experiences, who we might call them as spiritually evolved. So, yeah.
So when did this happen for you in your life? When did you become spiritual? Because from your name, it becomes like, it's easy to sort of stereotype like, oh, you're a Singh, so you probably grew up in a Sikh family.
I am, yeah.
Right. And then
Yes.
how did that go from, and I'm curious, like what your household was like. Did parents practice Sikhism, and did you go to like the Gurdwara? Like, what did that look like? And then how did that go from there to what you just said?
Yeah, you make me think. And now that you ask me this question, I remember we were never very staunch in our religious practices, that we must go to Gurdwara, or we must not cut our hair. Like you can see my hair is cut. And my dad wears a turban, and very proudly so. But our belief system was very different. My parents' belief system was very, what I would say, futuristic and spiritual in the same sense. They believed in the crux, in the message that Sikhism brought. They built, be the good human, do the right thing, do not lie, be authentic, be credible, all those things. So those were, while growing up, those were my pillars of belief system that I saw my parents. That is spirituality. All religions, the crux is the same. Whatever religion you may talk about, they, like whatever religious leader, spiritually evolved person you might hear, the ones who are authentic, the ones who are true in their nature, their words might be different, the message is the same. So that crux was what we grew up with. That is my core. And I think just spirituality kind of evolved from there. I like to do meditation. I like to sit in my quiet time. Whenever I get the quiet time, I just like to close myself and look within. And when I say look within, can be many different ways, can be retrospective, of like introspection, retrospection of my own actions, of my own thoughts, keeping a check on my thought process, how negative I'm thinking, how biased I am I victim of my own biases, being my own reality check kind of a thing.
That's so cool because I think there is, I'm also reading a book. It's talking about just conversations, and it's saying that the conversation range for a person is like all the way from the dialogue that you have within, and then the committee that sits inside your brain between two ears, and it's saying stuff. You're doing good job, bad job, you suck, you're amazing. To the extreme other end is that you're speaking to a large crowd, and we're definitely going to explore both of these things in the conversation that we have, because one part of it is this spiritual side of you, which is the introspective, or you're questioning and trying to figure out the deeper meaning in some of the things that you're doing, but also how that then reflects outwards when you're dealing with change, transformation, business context, all those things. Love it. So let's just start with like, how do we know each other?
That one.
That was my Alexa. Alexa, stop. I think Alexa.
Alexa is like, how do we know each other? Well, you bought me at a store.
Actually, you got me through Amazon.
Oh, there you go. You got me through Amazon.
So,
wow.
So for the audience listening, how do we know each other?
Yes. What a long time that we've known back in the day. So we met in College of Art, GCA. You were 1 year junior to me. I was 1 year next. And when you came in, your cousin and my sister were friends too. So it was like, that's how we also got to know one another. And then you remember College of Art days. That college was such a close-knit, tight family, just 15 people in one class. Just like each year has just 50, 60 people, 70, not more than that. The entire college, so very few people. And you and I got to spend like 3 years together in that college, studying, working together, our sketching days. You came in, I was a senior. I was giving you work and some hard time. Get these sketches tomorrow.
I'm glad that we've established the power dynamic in this conversation.
Oh my God. Yeah, no more of that. That college is gone, but that was like spending time. You remember Chacha, the little shack that we had for snacks and tea, and we used to have tea over there in the greens.
Yeah, I mean, for the audience listening, I'll just add some color to what you said. Isha and I met in India in a town called Chandigarh, where we went to college together. It's called the Government College of Art. And the interesting fact about that college was that the building was inspired by Corbusier. I think he's the guy who designed it, and it was designed in such a beautiful way that the windows were set up in such a way that you had natural light throughout the day without direct sunlight, which was an amazing engineering marvel from that time. And that allowed, creativity to flourish because you had clarity, in terms of what you could see, and you could see each other, so it plays into that communication part. But that was that beautiful thing about that campus as well. And that's where we met. And on the backside behind that campus was this guy called Chachaji, who used to make tea and samosas, and it would just be like a place to sort of hang out and chit chat.
And that was back in 2002.
I don't even remember. I think that was a long time ago.
17. Yeah, I passed. I graduated from GCA College of Art in 2005. So that was the last we met, Paul, in 2005. And you tapped into your old friend after 17 years. And thank you so much for doing that. When I saw your message, more than anything else, it was the excitement to get in touch with you again. Thank you for doing that.
By the way, I don't get that a lot. Just putting that out there. So do you have any other like fond memories of, because we were just talking about college, any fond memories from college that you specifically, your personal stories?
So many memories, but I can go on, but I'll start with two key lessons that or learnings that have stayed with me throughout. And I even apply every single day of my life, which has helped me in every aspect. So, one was don't fall in love with your own work. It's very easy, right? It's so easy to fall in your own work, fall in love with your own work.
I love that lesson. It's like be humble, and it goes back to that ego thing that you were just talking about. But yes.
Yeah. So because when you see, when you create something, be it creative, be it a presentation, so whatever you have done, an Excel for something, you're doing some analysis. When you fall in love with what you've done, you cannot be unbiased towards that. You cannot see it from a third perspective. You cannot identify the gaps in that. So you will fall a victim to your own biases, your own blind spots. And when you are right the opposite, when you're not, and then people will give feedback, right? It's a collaborative world. And in the corporate and advertise, everywhere you go, it's a collaborative world. So people work together. They will give you feedback. It makes it so much more easier to take the feedback when you're not falling in love with your work. And it's always easier to have that continuous improvement mindset, and you can continue to make that piece of work, whatever it is, better. And the second one, which, Paul, I am sure you will relate to it a lot, we did, was every time we would do some sketching, especially on the big canvas, we would do a live study or something, we would step back and we would take a look at the complete picture, how it's coming, are the proportions right? Are the colors right? Am I getting what I'm looking at? Because we would have a model sitting in front of us, right? So my takeaway from that day-to-day experience was always take a step back. When you're in the weeds of something, when you're doing something, always take a step back and look at that complete picture. Look at that big picture. Now we call it big picture, but look at that complete picture and keep doing it often and frequently. Because when you go too much into the weeds, it's very easy to lose track of your objective, to lose track. I'm trying to connect the dots with the corporate world, but I will also connect the dots with the creative work, with when you're creating a piece of art, an advertising, an ad, a design, a logo. When you're in the weeds, it's very easy to lose track of what the full picture looks like. What's your objective? A very, very tactical example from the days of art college is when that model would be sitting in front of us and the giant canvas would be in front of us and we are just making the face or the eyebrows or something, right? If we are not stepping back, the face would look after half an hour very, very different than what.
I know what you mean.
So portrait study, life study, how do they connect dots with me in today's life? These are the two things. Don't fall in love with your own work and take a step back. Keep looking at the complete picture.
That's amazing, actually. The idea of detaching yourself from your work and detaching it from your self-worth and looking at it as a thing that you're testing and trying out. That's a really interesting perspective. I'd be curious, like what other, things about that sentiment do you find powerful or interesting? And even like this taking a step back, like, okay, let me just reevaluate, what am I doing? And it's like that same analogy of like introspection to what it looks like outwards, the macro versus the micro. Really interesting. So in this detach yourself, any other experiences that you've had where this framework was super helpful to you?
There's so many because it's like an everyday thing for me. I'm trying to give a macro example. So let's put it this way. In a advertising world, I'll give two examples, one from the advertising world, one from the corporate world now that I'm in. Boeing was one example. Every piece of art would be, every campaign that I'm doing would be. But let's talk about this one campaign, Boeing, where we had to create this entire national campaign for Boeing's 777.
That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, yes, that was one of my favorite projects in 2009 and 10. So we must have given them so many options, and that client was very tough, very difficult. It's a very old story that I'm sharing, so I don't remember all the details, but I'll just keep it at a very, very high level. There was so much back and forth feedback that at one point in time, I was so tired of giving them the same visual with this much change here, this much change here, that I realized my headline started getting typo errors. Once that happened, and that the first time that happened, I was like, it's a mistake, but it happened the second time. I sent them the visual. It was a very clean ad, a visual and one liner, and there was a typo error. Once I forgot to put the airplane in the ad. They were like, "Where's my airplane?" That's when I realized that I'm so much in the weeds, you know. And I keep getting this feedback. I'm not liking it. So I decided to just take a step back and detach myself from this work, because the more feedback I was getting, the more pressurized I was feeling, the more biased I was becoming towards, yes, I like this. Why are they not liking it? And I'm not happy with what I'm doing, without realizing I'm not open to their perspective when I'm biased, right? So that really helped. And then with the same example continuing with the next item, where take a step back, right? So you are in the same field. So when we are taking pictures of models, when we want to compose a scene for Boeing, it was really insane because we wanted very particular angles, which were actually not realistic, to be honest. We had to show people full size, but we had to show aeroplane also, but we had to show huge sky as well. So we went to Ladakh, we did some shoot of the skies, we did other cities, we did shoot for people doing different activities. And then just to make the entire picture look realistic, you could not do it if you were not looking at it from a distance again and again and again. It's the same with any other piece of art, I would say. But if sometimes you're in a state of flow, in a state of, like, when you're working on something, you just continue. You get into the weeds and you go on a tangent and you keep going. So I was working on this ad and I kept working. After some time, somebody came and tapped on my shoulder and said, "This is so skewed. Do you realize?" I was like, oh. Really? I don't see it. So I stepped away, went for a coffee. Actually didn't come back that day, came back next day. And I saw how skewed it was. This is one example. I'll share this in context of my current role as a transformation coach, OCM, change management coach, or just in any corporate role this would apply. Be in marketing, sales, strategy. All companies have objectives.
Why don't we tell the audience, give them like a full sort of form of quick version of what do you currently do and what is sort of your current role in the world in terms of the work that you do?
Sure. So currently I am a transformation and change management coach, advisor to Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae is America's one of the leading names in housing and finance and housing mortgage industry. For the folks who are going to watch this, I've had multiple pivots in my entire career journey. And if you look at my career path, it's like a long, winding road. People would say, "What is she doing?" Different things. Do they really connect? So I was in advertising. And then I was in management consultancy for some time, and then I moved here. So that's my current role as being, and I love this role. I enjoy it so much every single day that this is the path where I'll continue to explore.
Now that we have sort of a context, a little bit more context in terms of your current role and sort of what you do and what you're passionate about and what you actually enjoy doing. So you can go back to that story where you were talking about, changing that focus point and changing the aperture of what you're looking at. And then you were going to give us like a business context to that story.
Yes, sure. So I was saying, in any company, you'll have objectives of any enterprise, any organization that we work for. So, and that's usually at the leadership level, and then they flow down. So there is this layer of leadership who's looking into strategy, who's sharing their objectives, and then they let the teams, the front line, go in and do the work. So this front line is, let's say I am that front line in let's say in this example, and I understand, okay, my company's objective is to do X at a higher level. But on my day-to-day basis, especially, in IT, even others, but I've seen a lot in IT that happens, developers who are so focused on the piece of work that they're doing every single day that they do not realize what the larger objective is. So sometimes, teams can sway, they'll continue to work. But if you don't have those regular conversations, which is taking a step back and looking at your objectives, are we in line with achieving the objective that we set forth for ourselves? Or for that matter, if things have changed, do we need to then have a conversation that really, is this the objective that we should be striving for? What is the priority? So it's like a two-way thing where you want to have the conversation with the leadership also to understand, well, these are the objectives. This is what we are doing. If this is not in line with it, let's have a conversation, like what really should we be doing and prioritize. So that's where stepping back and taking a look at what you're doing at a macro level. And when I say macro level, it's in terms of people, in terms of teams, how they're working together towards the same objective.
Right. So I have a couple of questions on this specific thing. So one is sort of what you're outlining is that there is at the top level, at the executive level, they've decided there's a change in strategy. And now that has to percolate downwards all the way down to the front line, and all the initiatives, marketing plans, or the products that they're making, or the hiring strategy, all that has to sort of ladder up to that, the new sort of business strategy. Now, typically, in what kind of situations do you get invited into these kind of conversations, and who typically is the right person that you would want to talk to initiate something like this? Firstly, the question is, to simplify it, one is, in what kind of context do you get invited for these kind of change management, OCM stuff? Are there any examples that you can take? And then when you go into those situations, once you sort of describe that story, it would be helpful to also know if you face any resistance and how you overcome that, maybe at a leadership level first, and then how that resistance and change is you face all across the whole ladder of people that you encounter.
Any organization, when they're rolling out a large, complex change initiative, now this change initiative could be a transformation, like an agile transformation, where in an IT company, let's say the teams were waterfall. That's a process that the teams follow. And then they have to move into agile. That's going to be a big change. The idea is, when the people, I will take one step back further. So people, processes, product. These are the three important P's of any organization: product, process, and people. So when this is at point A, they need to take it to point B for whatever reason, change in strategy, things are not working, they want to do things differently, which could be a digital transformation, which could be a new process being initiated for efficiencies, whatever it is. From point A to point B, when they want to move the entire organization, that's when I'm called in to help the people. I work with the people side of the change to help the people move from point A to point B, to help them on their change journey, help them stay there on point B and evolve. So when I go in, I understand what is the current state, and I talk to the senior leadership, who's sitting at the strategy level, who's deciding the strategy, who are the sponsors of that change. We understand the why behind it. Like, why are you bringing in this change? What is the benefit? What was not working? What is the goal and objective of bringing in this change? To understand that. And then from there on, it's a journey to understand all levels of ecosystem, for that matter. And when I say all levels of ecosystem, I personally work with executive leaders, let's say senior VPs, COOs, operating officers, chief operating officers, those people. And then I work with middle management, which is directors, managers, people managers, all of these. And then I work with frontline also. So that's all levels of the ecosystem. So we understand from all levels of ecosystem as well, like what is the current state? What are the challenges? We understand the change being proposed. I try to map the benefits with the gaps. Understanding the why and being able to speak that is very important, to communicate that. One, the correct message. Two, in a way that everybody can understand and comprehend. So that's what I do. So that's basically, I'm sharing with you the journey of who are the people I talk to, how do I go about it, the entire process, right?
Some of the questions that sort of come to mind is, so of course you talk to executives, you talk to sponsors. So who are the initial people that you must have the buy-in first to even get started on something like this? Like, let's say, like an example is like, you're like, Paul, if I don't get the buy-in of these people, we can't even start, because we already know that that's going to be a big red flag. So that would be my first sort of question. So who are the decision makers that need to greenlight this in order to kick something off so complex for an org?
So this answer is going to be a bit lengthy. And the reason is this. First, of course, there's a group of people who've decided this change. They already have the buy-in. They are the sponsors. We need to understand the stakeholders. Who are these stakeholders? The people who are impacted. What kind of impact is on them? When we understand the high impact and high influence, those are the people we identify. We need buy-in from. These can be the customers, these can be the partners, but we want to understand the impact, like who's impacted. And then we identify. So first is, of course, the leadership always, because whatever said and done, however flat an organization is, however bi-directional the conversations are, there's always a strategy and big change initiatives that are rolled down to the entire organization. So that has to happen from the leadership, executive leadership level, then the senior leadership, the VPs. But the key is to identify the impacted stakeholders and what is the level of impact. If somebody who just is impacted to an extent where they need to be aware of it, is not somebody I'm too worried about. But somebody who has a high influence and who is impacted high is somebody I want to go and talk to and get a buy-in from. Those are the sponsors and those are the partners, customers. And then after that, it doesn't end, because resistance is another thing we were talking about, right? What kind of resistance we need. So we also need to identify the leadership might be bought in, but they may not. So we also need to understand the passive aggressive behavior, who is really supportive, who is really just pretending to support. So there's a whole lot of analysis that goes into it. It's a long journey of that work. But once we have crossed that hump, we've crossed that path of identifying and coaching. That's where the coaching also plays in. We modulate our and customize our like my coaching, like how I'm going to coach person X versus person Y, what kind of conversations I want to have with them. Along with that comes the middle management, the people who are totally impacted. Let's say there is a new automated process that is being introduced. I'll give an example of that. Everything might look just fine, but people who have to execute that process, they are not buying into it. So we need buy-in from them too, right? And we need to understand why that resistance. That's where a lot of resistance comes in. No, now there could be reasons is what I focus at. Like what are the reasons of resistance? What are the motivators? I have had personally conversations with people where for long these internal influencers in the team who may not be the manager, who may not be a director, but are old people who have been working for a long time, old not in the sense of age, but they've been there for 5 years, 10 years, and they have that internal influence at a very, very high level too, because they've been there, they have their connects. Those are the people we need buy-in from. And sometimes when those are the people who resist, like I'll share one example with you. I was on a consulting project for one of these process improvements effort, which we can call transformation also, which we can call change management also. But basically, we were introducing this process. It was automated. Within one of these larger teams, there was a lot of resistance that we were facing. And it was eventually I tracked down to one person, like, why is this person not supportive? And to get into a very tactical example, right? How would I go and talk to him? I had a coffee with him. I tried to understand, like just a heart-to-heart conversation. You have to come across very authentic. And that can only happen if you feel that way. So I had a conversation with him, like to understand his challenges. And what do I realize? He's concerned about his job. He thinks he might lose his job. Whereas the process was actually going to make him super efficient and he would be doing so much better in that space. And when I was able to help him understand that just like how much support I got from that space. And that was one space that was actually then, the trailblazer for that process. And all the other teams were kind of following their footsteps. Amazing, like how one conversation can also sometimes just make such a huge change. So, but at all levels, you need to understand where the resistance is coming from and what are the reasons of resistance.
I love the example, by the way, that you just took, that you firstly extended and invited this person into a conversation. You built psychological safety into it by being authentic and all that stuff. And then I think we've not said the specific word, but I think you've sort of hovered around this word, maybe, and tell me if I've understood this or not only if I've understood this correctly, but also if I'm also seeing what you're seeing. Mm-hmm. You're really getting into what is the incentive behind this person wanting to change? Yes. What is driving them?
What's in it for me?
Yeah.
Right? What's in it for me? Why should I change? That's true. So you actually hit a very, very good point. And I would just like to take maybe a minute to talk about this. What's in it for me? For any change that I would be responsible in introducing and helping people move towards. And this is like every change manager, change person, change agent, evangelist should do, is first share the why, like, why are we going to make this change? And then the second thing we want to share is what's in it for you. There's always something. And that's the hardest thing to do, because you really need to sink your teeth deep into understanding what that person, that team, that group is doing, that this change is going to help them, and connect those dots and help them see that picture. And I realized that I said, you know what? You are the guys who are taking care of this entire organization. And not just in terms of our data protection and everything else, but these you have your security people who, and the cameras and people and guards, like this whole group is there who's taking care of this building as well. So in all tangible ways, you are supporting this, and this is how this process is going to support you. And there was an immediate shift. Like there has to be that aha moment. And I saw first, I had an aha moment when I was able to connect the dots with the work they do with this process and how it can help them. And then there was an aha moment for them when they realized, oh, this is relatable.
That's
what's in it for me is very important and not easy.
So I think the common thread that you're sort of, again, touching on is having true understanding of this individual. Because ultimately these companies are, a group of people working together, or sometimes not working together because it can be a very dysfunctional group of people.
Yes.
And so the examples that you've taken, I'm so glad that you brought some very tactful, sort of actionable steps that you also take. Like, for example, meeting this person for coffee, understanding what is their incentive, what are their fears, what are their concerns. And then the other one is the example that you're taking is how to make this whole complex thing that's happening relatable, and connecting the dots in terms of how this thing relates to you and what you're doing and what your contribution is to the bigger picture. That's fantastic. I think, again, like, some of these things seem like a lot of common sense stuff, but I think a lot of people get lost in like complicated strategy process, and they get like, no, but like we do this like very complicated thing. Our org structure is like super complicated, and this product that we create, is also super, so they're just hiding behind these titles, layers, processes, and forgetting that. And what you're saying is most of these things are simple, commonsensical things, which is just having a conversation, understanding the incentives of the person. What are their fears? How does that connect back to their contribution to the bigger picture? So now, sorry, that was just an observation, just ingesting what you said.
Absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And it's very common.
So I think the follow-up question for me would be, now, these scenarios that you've described, or some of the examples that you took, were more of, executives at the top are going through some change, and they've brought us in, and we're going to help them through this thing, and whatever that looks like. Are there situations where you go in and the whole company is very dysfunctional, and you have to sort of figure out who are even the right people to talk to? And have you ever encountered any situations where it was not ideal and you had to navigate and find, get the buy-in of the right leadership, identify those people, like all that stuff? So the question is, have there been situations where it was dysfunctional, nothing was organized, and you had to figure out a way? And what did you actually end up doing, and what worked and what didn't work?
Yes, and that happened. So I'll give you this example of a program that we were supporting. I'll call it out, clouds. The main objective of this program that is set up, let's look at this in a little more visual way. An organization has verticals, different, like an enterprise has different verticals. And this program is horizontal, cutting across all verticals. So that's like a horizontal program across the enterprise. The idea is to onboard or move your applications from an on-prem to cloud. My team was called in, and we were transformation coaches with transformation office, and a very small group of us was tapped on the shoulder, and we said, we need your help. We are setting up this program. And we had, I had with my teams, rolled out this enterprise transformation for my organization with ways of working. So they wanted to bring in the coaches for help and bringing that mindset from the start. We did not know what the role was. I did not know what my role was. I did not know what am I supposed to do here. Who are the right people? Just very few people I knew. I figured we talk, of course, like some key people, right? And then it's absolutely gray area. So one thing that anyone who's in this space must be comfortable is ambiguity. And I can tell you, my days of art college and my learnings have I'm an artist at heart, creative at heart, and creativity is pretty ambiguous if you look at it. Yeah. Right. So you have a vague thought in your mind, and then you bring it to life, either through a sculpture or through a visual or through a video, whatever you are doing, right? Or through a poem, through words. But that's creativity, having that ambiguous idea and then bringing a tangible, tactical picture to it. And I will say that just because I come from that background, I have thrived in this role. People who do not know that I come from creative backgrounds wonder like how there's a whole group of people who are doing the same job, but there's only a handful of people who are able to thrive. And I will say anyone who has who has a right brain working as well. So the left brain, of course, is required, but who have their right brain working can thrive so much more. So yes, we were brought in. I had no clue, gray, ambiguous state, talking to the sponsors, talking to people. What works for me is I go after the value. What value can I provide you? I have a diverse skill set. I can bring in so many things for you. So I will not lay the platter for them, but I will try and understand what are your needs? Where are the gaps? What keeps you up at night? That's the kind of question I ask the leaders. Like, what keeps you up at night? What are your biggest challenges? What are you looking for? Where do you need real help? And when you start digging deeper, you identify these issues, these challenges, and I'm talking about leaders, but it's actually, I have the same conversations with the frontline team members also. Like, what are your challenges? You know why I have these conversations? So that I can connect the dots. Because a leader who's sitting there doesn't know what's going on at the ground level. He might be in his own la la land thinking everything is working fine in my process, but actually, boss, it's not, your one application doesn't work, or there's this gap in the process which you don't realize. There's no collaboration. People are working in silos. I identify the immediate gaps. I identify the low-hanging fruits, and I go after them. And then there's no looking back, because then you have the support from leadership, because you as a coach have proven your value. You're helping them where they need your help, instead of coming top down and saying, hey, these are the processes, and now I'm going to train you on these, whether you need it or not. I'm not going to do that. Though I have all those processes at the back of my mind, and in whatever I'm proposing them, I'm showcasing one or two as much as they can take in with the value. Like, okay, now I think I should give you this example of strategy cascade. So when I went to the cloud program, the one thing that I kept hearing from teams, developers, managers, different layers was, yeah, we are doing this, but Why do we need a cloud program? Why do we need this? Why are we doing this? I went to the sponsor, senior leader, who I used to coach very frequently. We would meet once or twice a week or as needed. I shared with him my observations. I was like, you know what, this is something that I'm observing, and this is the data to back up my observation. Of course, you must read the person, you must read the room and understand what kind of people they are and hold your conversations accordingly. That was a data person. So I backed up this thing with data. Like, this is from the focus groups coming in, from one-on-ones, interviews, and everything. So I proposed to him, let's do a strategy cascade. No, we don't need one. Right? I was like, yeah, this is why you need one. But then when I was sharing with you earlier, like, understand the reasons for resistance, I understood his reason for resistance and addressed that. And I proposed, like, for him, it was capacity. It was, he didn't have so many people who would do this. It's like a huge effort for him. And whatever other reasons were there, I proposed, I said, like, you know what? Let me take a stab at it. All I need from you is some documentation where I can understand your objectives and key results, your OKRs. And that's all I need from you. And then I will share what I have. Let's take it forward. If you don't like it, we can dump it. That's where don't fall in love with your own work really helps.
Yeah.
So I shared that with him, and he realized, oh wow! Because what I did, what's a strategy cascade? Just for the people who are watching this, strategy cascade is connecting the dots from the top to bottom. This is the enterprise level strategy, digital transformation for my enterprise. Cloud program is going to support that digital transformation. What is digital transformation? We are changing our processes based on the needs of the market in a more digital manner so that it's more efficient, so that we are addressing whatever the needs. Digital transformation at a very, very high level, whatever those things, nuances might be. Cloud program is supporting digital transformation. How are you coming into the picture? The day-to-day work that you're doing, even to the level of, I'm going to talk some agile terms, but basically the chunk of work, the epics that you're doing, right? They are like the chunk of work that you are planning to complete in a X amount of time. Connecting the frontline work to the top enterprise strategy. When I put that entire picture together, it was like a very aha moment for that person. When he looked at it, he was like, ooh. He had his feedback. I took his feedback. We improvised it. Whatever the final outcome was, I was like, let's try with one team. Of course, we had, when I'm sharing these things, I'm not going into too much actual tactical details, but when these things happen, we are collaborating with stakeholders. Again, as I said, impacted stakeholders, right? Who are going to be impacted? Who need to collaborate in this, need to get their buy-in. After all of that, I shared it with one or two teams when they were onboarding on the program, and it was such a positive feedback that eventually they made this entire visual into a full-fledged onboarding training. And I have had so much positive feedback from the teams. Like, now we know what we are doing, why we are doing, and how we are helping Fannie achieve their goals. It just motivates people. So that's the kind of going back and connecting the dots to your question. Like, these are the things that are so important. Simple, obvious, but very, very common that people overlook these.
I think the initial point that you made, that it's so critical to share the why. And when you're sharing that why, it has to be simple. So I think that strategy cascade visual, maybe simplified. What are we really doing here, guys? Like, folks, what are we doing here? And there's that one visual that people can point to and say, this is what we're doing. And it's like this simple articulation of something super complex. And then you connect that visual to, okay, now what does this mean to you in your day-to-day? And how does this lead up to that? So I love that. And then what I really, really like what you said earlier was that when you're going into these ambiguous situations where there's a lot of complexity, a lot of chaos, and people are walking with their, I'm going to sort of throw this in there. They didn't say this, but people are walking around with their
Headless
heads cut
chickens.
off, headless chickens. Is you sort of start engaging people in conversations and you start identifying what is the problem behind the problem, what are the true challenges by understanding them. And this could also look like a coffee chat. This could look like,
Yes.
right? And then what you do is you aim for quick wins. And by doing that, you're showing getting to value quick and proving that, yeah, there's value in doing this. And now you have the support of the executives and even the people that you're working with. So to get that win and to get that buy-in, you're following like a really nice, simple step-by-step sort of framework of engage in conversation, understand the challenges, and get them some quick wins so that you get that buy-in for the bigger chunk of whatever that might be, if that is the case. Love it. I was just like blown away. And then you also talked about one more thing that you talked about, which was really sort of hit the mark, is that even when you're having these conversations, you're not stuffing down your frameworks and your processes down anybody's throat. You're really looking at the situation. Is this actually required? And if this could be solved with like that analogy that people use, if it can be solved with a text message, why spend the money to make like this, $100,000 video? So I like the approach and mindset that you have towards these sort of complex situations and how you're sort of navigating through these difficult sometimes and challenging resistance and change. Egos. I think that's something that we should definitely talk about is egos. I really like the tactful step-by-step examples that you're taking because a lot of stuff that happens is, and typically when you end up listening to podcasts where people talk about like change management, work strategy, all of them typically stay very high level. And I really like how you're sort of connecting the dots between the high level strategy and what that might look like in a very tactful interaction, right? To help people see the bigger picture or look at, what's their incentive and all that stuff.
See, I never asked you what is your objective of making this podcast, but I assumed one.
Yeah.
From my side was if somebody's looking at this, they should learn something. Maybe I can share something from my experience that they can leverage, they can learn, connect, like use it in their life, wherever they need to use it. So that was which is where I'm trying to make it very like actionable, sharing my own examples. This is how I do it. I can like prompt me to share. However, like I can share in a way because I do training so I share my own examples. The idea is as a coach, I want others to learn building capability within other people. That's always my end goal in any of these engagements that I have. The idea is I go in, whatever I'm doing it for a X amount of time. At the end of it, I have to go. I will leave. And when I leave, I want to make sure that I've built enough capability within that space that they can then take it forward from there and then evolve. So it's like I have turned people as trainers within that space. That's when I leave and I feel happy that I have done something. So again, that's like, don't fall in love with your own work, because at the end of it, when you're leaving this entire project, you connect with so many people, you take so many connections and relationships with you. But there's this term in management consulting called high five diffusion. It really means like you have the capability to, at the end of the day, give a high five to the other person and say, you did a great job, and not take all the credit and not worry about taking all the credit, because My idea as a consultant, as a coach, is to build capability and then.
I think this high five diffusion thing, I didn't know this term existed, but I find myself constantly living by this philosophy and really being like, oh, you guys are the subject matter experts. I'm just more curious. How are we thinking about this? And really being this, coming from this place of like humble inquiry versus telling people what to do. I think in terms of the things that you were talking about being as a coach, you're helping the horse get to the water versus giving the horse the water. And you're helping them come to their own answers. So they own the answers. They feel smart about coming up with the answer on their own. And because now they own it, that's going to obviously remove some of that friction between their current state and what kind of behaviors you want them to sort of, start living by day to day, right?
Self-discovery, right? We help them on the path of their self-discovery by asking questions. That's an art. We need to learn to ask the right questions to help them stay on that path of self-discovery. Yet, I'm going to sound very mean, but as a coach, I have a framework at the back of my head. I have the processes that I want them to adopt. But, you have to help them understand that on their own, on that path of self-discovery. And when I was earlier touching upon, like, yes, there are so many processes, but I don't shove everything down the throat immediately. Whatever I'm proposing them, wherever I'm adding value, I will showcase value of one or two of those things. Let's say a visual management tool or a demand and capacity management tool. I will not call it that. But what I am telling them, showcasing value through, is that when they've actually seen the value, that's when I'm bringing the formal, and then they're more open. And that path to self-discovery by asking questions is exactly that, to help, from here to here. There has to be a shift in the mindset. And when I'm telling you to do something versus when you are realizing yourself that if you do this, it will help you. See, there's a whole mindset shift that happens automatically. Your approach to that action will be very different. So I totally agree with you, what you were saying.
I think one lesson or message that, is definitely a takeaway or learning from these conversations till now into the podcast is, even though we might be talking about digital transformation, implementing Salesforce or some Oracle or some sort of cloud implementation, what we're really talking about is how do we help people through change?
Yes.
It's all about people, irrespective of how complicated the technology is, blah, blah, blah.
It's people.
Boils down to people. And I think I find myself so many times in conversation with people, they're so like, again, just I'm sort of, I sound like a broken tape record. I find people constantly being stuck in like these complicated jargon, techno babble, speak, process, or this is this futuristic thing, and it's like blah, blah, blah. But they forget that you have to take people along on that journey.
I want to share this very interesting story, very funny. And I'm going to get a little vulnerable because I'm going to sound stupid, but I'll share this with you because what you touched upon just reminded me of something with the technical jargon and complicated things. I was in a really big, when I say big, there are a lot of people in that conference, and there was somebody presenting. I was one of the key people in the front, so I should understand what they're saying. I must understand because eventually I have to, right, take the message forward. I couldn't understand anything. And I was feeling lost, embarrassed, because I didn't have any questions to ask. For that matter, I didn't understand what that person was saying. Where was he going with it? And then I pulled the courage to ask my neighbor, do you understand what he's saying? And guess what I hear? That person didn't understand anything. He was in the same position. Then we had our laptops and we have our internal chat. So I sent a message to another teammate of mine who was a few seats away over there. I sent a message, No, I'm sorry, but I really can't get what this person is saying. Do you understand? Guess what response I get? I'm in the same boat as you are. I I had like 6, 7 people tell me that they don't understand. So I felt so much better, confident, not to challenge that person there and then, but just in the fact that I'm not a doofus sitting here not getting what he's saying. It's okay. Like I'm not getting it. Guess what? My boss is not getting it either. My team is not getting it either. So I'm okay. I'm still safe. And that was so early in my role as a management consultant space, and I will specifically say management consulting life and after that. So it was so early that my takeaway in that moment was whatever I'm going to share, I will say it in the language that the other person can understand. Not easy.
I think you've touched on two sort of big themes. The first theme is the psychological safety and culture that you have within your team to be like, hey, I don't understand what you're saying, and to be able to ask stupid questions, and that not being seen as, oh, I might be dumb and whatever. So having that psychological safety. And then the second theme, or sorry, let me just add one more thing to that first part, is the ability to just like, hey guys, I have my hand up. I don't know what the hell going on. Can somebody explain to me what's going on? And then the second theme that you touched on, which is to do with why the role of communication and speaking in sort of a grade 8 language is so important, and it's even more important when you've got something super complex, technology, change happening, because it's not about what you're saying, it's about what's being heard and understood. And then in that dynamic, how is your audience feeling? Are they feeling smarter as they're listening to you? Or are they feeling dumber and they're feeling even more insecure?
Yes. You touch such an important point. How are the people feeling listening to you?
Do you have any, do you want to expand on that with any personal experience or anecdotes, anything additional that comes to mind?
I've said this to multiple people now, and I don't hesitate saying this here, sharing this with you. I've been in absolutely two different cultures, work cultures. Advertising, marketing communications is one side of it, and business management consulting is another side of it. They have so many commonalities, yet they are so different. I will touch upon the one difference that stands out to me always, every day. When we were in advertising, when I was in advertising, and I would create something, or my team would create something, my feedback to them, or the feedback I would get was always like, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. Less is more, keep it simple. When I moved to the corporate side, the consulting, management consulting business side, right? It was totally opposite. How complex can you make it to look more smart? Oh, wow. I like the presentations, so many messages on the same slide, such a complex flow of something. And I would go in and I would start, like proposing ideas on how we can simplify it. And now I want to touch upon your question, like how can I expand on that, where you're speaking to an audience, you're speaking to a group of people, and speaking to them in the language they understand. This has always helped me. So I've not left behind my creative advertising days. Actually, I carry them with me every single day in everything I do. The crux, the lessons, the takeaways, the belief system. Whatever I try to do, one thing I try to do is keep it simple. One commonality of coming as a management consulting, and you would find out from so many of them, they all have this belief system. McKinsey, BCG, all these top level consulting companies, one thing they would tell you is, and look for in consultants, is their ability to transform complex messages into simple, comprehensible messages when they're talking to people. Yeah, do they do it in their presentations? Well, that's debatable. But when we are talking to each other, when I'm talking to my customer is going to give me a huge picture, complex picture. I need to give it back to him in a synthesized. Can you synthesize it in one or two bullet points? That's like keeping things simple, keep the core of the message and keep it simple. So I do public speaking, I do trainings, small group trainings, large group trainings. The first thing for me is to understand, who am I talking to? And it's always different with a different group. Why? Because when you're talking to an executive leaders or senior leaders like VPs, right, vice presidents, senior vice presidents, they, when you're talking to them, your message, your language, everything would be different for the same training that we have to give to the middle management, to the front line. So one thing is, always understand who you are talking to and what resonates with them. Talk to them in their language. With leadership, it's more strategic. With frontline, it's a lot more tactical. And again, I might sound like a beaten, broken record, but how can you relate to them? Giving those examples. I'll share this with you. When we were rolling out this enterprise level transformation for one of the organizations that I support, enterprise level transformation is for the entire company. So a whole lot of people are working towards that as part of transformation office. Of course, I am part of that too. So again, when I say this, I want to set the context right. I want to set the perspective right. It's not a one-person job. So I don't want anybody to understand it in a way that it's just a one-person job to do this. We are a group of people who do this, right? So we are teaching them and training them on different tools, different frameworks, which the leadership also has to use, which the team also has to use. But the way they're going to use the same tool is different. So we change the way I change the way I go and train them, the kind of activities I will have for them. My presentation looks different. When I have to present something to a senior leader, usually it's one or two slides. 500 times I will look at that one or two slides and revisit the message and make it simple, make it shorter, crisp, to the point. When the same thing goes to the teams, it's a lot more information because it's a lot more tactical. So speaking to them in their language is important, and I try to do that. Trainings, presentations, coaching conversations, they all have to be. So when you read the room, and then again, when you're doing this, I shouldn't be blind to people. Like many times what happens when people are in the front of the room, there's anxiety, there's stress when you're speaking in front of a group of people. If it's a small group and senior leadership, that's a different kind of stress. If there's 100 people in the room, mixed group, that's a different kind of stress. So a lot of time what happens, we don't make an eye contact to avoid showing stress on our face or getting that stress. And we don't look at people to not get distracted by expressions and all. I do look at the people in the room. I do look at their expressions because I want to know, is somebody sitting blank? Is somebody getting bored and snoozing away? That means I'm not doing a good job. I'm not speaking the right language and I need to fix it right away. I need to pivot. So that's one thing. Wanted to just connect the dots with the question you asked me, like when you're presenting. speaking the language. How would you do that? Read the room is very, very important.
Love it. I think the earlier had said these 2 points, and I've highlighted them also. I've got these highlighters and pens.
Okay.
One was, how you were talking about not only reading the room, reading the person, individual who is part of that room. And I think I really also want to sort of just emphasize a couple of other points that you made. And I just want to, just so I'm sort of summarizing here, what I understood and taking away from this, which is super valuable and helpful, is one is that you are deploying a lot of cognitive empathy. You're really getting into, okay, who are these people? What's driving them? And you're also having, not even before you maybe, apart from these group large scale discussions, you're also having these individual interactions in certain cases, maybe not all of them, but you're also really contextualizing the information based on the audience receiving that information. And you're really being cognizant of, okay, am I speaking to this person in the voice that is best relatable to them? So, like you said, with the executives who might be in charge of future value, likely talking to them in that strategic way, whereas the frontline are more about the present value and more tactful. Okay, how do I action? Like, what's the thing I need to do to get done? What's the product I need to build or ship? Or, what's that customer I need to deal with? So it becomes very actionable, tactful steps in terms of their behaviors. And then the other part that I really like is that, so not only are you contextualizing and you're really knowing, okay, who is my audience, knowing the audience, what will resonate and be most relatable to them, and speaking in their voice. And that's really helping them connect the dots of the why, the strategy across all the different stakeholders from management, frontline, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, you're inviting people into the conversation constantly versus telling them that this is something they need to do. So I really, those are some of the highlight reel of what I just took away from what you said in the last few minutes. This is really mind blowing. Okay, so there's definitely a lot of threads that I want to pull from, and I want to take this conversation into a couple of places. But what I want to do is I want to go back in time for just a hot minute and really look under the hood of sort of what were your early days like? What's the story of Isha? Where did she grow up? What were her influences? What was her family life like? Whatever details that you're comfortable divulging into and expanding on. So
Sure. I get this question asked a lot. Where are you from? And then I don't have an answer to that. Usually people say, I'm from here, I'm from there. I'm talking in context of India. So here it's easy for me. I can tell I'm an Indian. I'm from India. But when an Indian asks me that question, I don't have an answer. Why? Because I was all over the place. And so growing up, my dad was in a transferable job. So we would move every 3 years. And I have lived in, if I were to think about 6, 7 different cities. And I'm talking about undergrad life, 6 probably different cities. So, what did it mean for me? We were moving every 3 years. So it really meant new city, new house, new neighborhood, new friends, new school, new environment, new atmosphere, new everything. So that was like, so when I shared 6 cities, and I'm also assuming that you understand it's 6 different schools and I'm talking about from a kindergarten to a 12th grade, which is right before college, undergrad in India. So, every 2-3 years, you're shifting, you're moving into a different city, different people. Culture is different sometimes. It could be similar culture, but, like you're changing friends, new friends, you're leaving old friends. So very early in life, I learned how to deal with and accept big, complex change. This was a big, complex change. Everything around you changes. So, what was that one constant for me? The one constant. But when things are changing, everybody needs one constant. Even like true trees, they need their roots somewhere. So that one constant for me was my family. What I call home is not a house in a city. It's my mother, my father, my sister, these three people. We are so close knit, such a strong bond. That is home for me. These people, three people are my home, and my roots grow into these people. So our belief system, our my whole personality is kind of revolved and evolved from this. And it might look like, earlier I had shared with you at one point, that if you look at my career path, it's a long winding journey: advertising, brand management, management consulting, MBA, transformation coach. But to be honest, if I look back at my entire journey, everything has played a pivotal role in bringing me to where I am today. And I'm not surprised that I'm a transformation coach. I'm a change management coach, and I help people deal and accept with change and evolve in that new space. Whatever kind of change that came in my life, for good, bad, ugly, great, happy, challenging, whatever the changes were, there have been so many. It was having this support that some objectives that I just shared with you: unbiased, non-judgmental, supportive, credible, authentic. You know, that's what helped me adjust, adapt to that change, and then evolve in that change. And from there, so I shared this once with somebody, if you talk about the earlier. So life brings, it's a saying, right? People say life throws lemons at you, you make lemonade. I usually say life would bring tidal waves at you. I take out my surfboard and ride them. So if you're thinking, what does this abstract metaphor mean? Like, take your surfboard and ride them. I want to bring a very, very tactical perspective to this, or for anyone who's listening. Tides, waves can be any challenges that life might give you in your personal, professional life. What is that surfboard? It's basically, number one, your perspective towards the challenge that you have. You can either look at the tidal waves as something that, oh my God, now I'm going to drown in this. Or you can take out your surfboard and bloody ride those waves and go to the shore. And that surfboard, riding the surfboard, is having that focus on the positive outcome. Like, I'm not going to drown. Let's try. What's my objective? When I had this big life event, which was very, very challenging, it was a life event, and at some point, it was a big, huge tidal wave that came my way. I could have drowned in it easily, but I decided to look at it as, what can I, what is it that I want to do? The both might have been not relatable, what I did versus the challenge that I was facing, but I went in and studied for my GMAT. Even though I'm a creative, right-brained person, maths was my last, the lowest marks subject in school. I went in for my GMAT, I sat, and then I went to Indian School of Business. I was accepted there. For that matter, all the B schools I applied, 90% of them I was accepted. I chose ISB because it was somewhere I absolutely wanted to go, and not outside of India. I wanted to stay within India. So doing an MBA and coming out of an Ivy League, top B school, top in India, and top 15, 20 in the world. It's not easy to get into that college. But in that time where I was facing those challenges, yet I was doing these things. It helped me as a person keep my perspective and objective straight, channelize my energies in a very, very positive outcome versus getting sunk in and going in the downward spiral of negativity and whatever that could be. So that's what I mean by when there's a tidal wave in front of you, take out your surfboard and just ride the wave.
Beautiful story. That there's so many interesting and insightful nuggets. Like one thing that spoke to me was there are a lot of things that happen in life, and it's what's the meaning we choose to put on those circumstances, situations. You could look at it in a negative way. You can look at it as a victim, or you can say, okay, what did I learn from this? And
yes.
You beautifully illustrated such a great story, and your story of resilience and sort of how you're looking at the difficult times and not spiraling. And then the other thing that you talked about, which was really insightful and helpful for context, is that because you were constantly moving, for you, home was not some physical thing, but it was a more psychological thing. So there's that psychological safety. And I think when we talk about coaching, it's like, how do you build that psychological safety into people and how do you help them get there?
Totally. Absolutely.
And then one final thought before I hand it over back to you is, a lot of times, and I've noticed this was specifically with like Asian families, is that there's a lot of communication gap in terms of how you communicate with your parents. And especially that might be even true for, I don't know how that, it's like a broad sort of generalization I'm making here. But because you were in that situation and you were, your parents were your home, I'm really curious, like how, what were you as a family doing to have those sometimes difficult conversations, or how were you improving, or how did you look at the bandwidth of that conversation between the family and being very communicative, and how did you actually go about that?
First, I want to acknowledge and appreciate that you have touched upon such a core important aspect, which I didn't talk about, is family, is communication. And if it wasn't there, I wouldn't have done what I was able to do. So to answer your question, like how did we go about it? First thing is trust. And as I shared with you, non-judgmental support, right? So family is at one place where at least, I call home, I can go back. I know, okay, whatever happens in the world, at least my mom, dad, I can go. Not all families might have it, but at least I was so fortunate to be in a place where my mom, my dad, my sister, all of us were very open communication. I can talk to my dad about anything under the sun. I can talk to my mom about anything under the sun. They're my best friends. How that happened, I don't know. That's how they are. That's how they brought me up. However, that transpired over the years. But were they disciplinarians? Oh, yes. People thought my dad was an army. That was like, I am yet to come across folks who can be so supportive. Did they have their opinions? Yes. Did they support me? Yes. Did I have to prove myself? Of course. But those conversations were open with them in the family. Having certain challenging conversations, I would be very happy to share, like how to have challenging conversations within corporate, within office. I do not expect that kind of conversation to happen at work with people. But with family, it was like no holds bar, like we are direct. So I'm a very direct person. My family is very direct. In this role, I have learned a lot to soften my messages, to read between the lines, talk indirectly, to give the message, but like this. For me, who's a straight shooter. And that, I think that straight shooting comes from the fact that we were very, very open to one another and nothing to hide, just an open book, talk about it. And Let's think through it. How do you want to do it? What do you want to do it? And that's where they have played a brilliant role of being a coach, asking me and pushing me in identifying my capabilities and then pushing me to realize my potential. Like I still remember, well, I was in that state where that challenge hit me and I was trying to deal with it. I was struggling. I was going through it. I was with my parents at that time, and my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, he's also like so close, pivotal. Like he's played such a pivotal role. He's like an elder brother to me, as my connection with him versus just a brother-in-law. So this guy, he calls me, and I wanted to do MBA from IGNO, which was a stay-at-home MBA, and just like time pass. He tells me, "You want to go do MBA? Do it in the top school." I didn't even know what top schools were. I was like, "Which one?" Like I don't even know. I said, "Go find out." Right? Google is there. You can search. Paul, that was a time I was so frustrated when he said that to me. I was like, how much are they expecting out of me? I can't do that. But he's just, it says like sow the seed and let it sprout. That's what they do. That's what my family does. Sow the seed, let it sprout. And all I need to do is provide the right support, provide the right, soil, water, which is in tactical terms, my energy, my effort, my willingness, my dedication towards that if I believe in it. So it happened. Like I didn't even know the name IIM, ISB, Harvard, Massachusetts, MIT, Cambridge, no names. I did not know these names, but I Googled top world B schools. List came. That's where I want to be. I failed the IGNO test. Oh my God, I went there. I didn't even know how to answer the questions. There were these circles I had to circle that. It was the first time for me. Even though I was preparing, what my teachers forgot to understand was this girl has probably never sat for such an examination, and she's coming from a very different background. So I went in, I looked at that test answer sheet, and they have circles, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And that examiner, the person who was there, he was looking at my face. He was in disbelief. What are you? You have to ask us how, where, like where do I write my answer? He's like, circle, color it. Half my answers must have been wrong because I colored the wrong circle. And then I still remember this, like this, you'll say, what a crazy woman this is. I, at one point, like I was zoned out because I wasn't enjoying the question paper. I wasn't enjoying it was very early in my journey of preparing for MBA and preparing for GMAT. I started coloring circles in a pattern. I made a pattern out of it. I didn't care whether they answered towards the end of it. If you look at it, that would have been some pattern colored here. First, second, third, fourth, fifth.
That's so funny. Love it. I think the other thing that you talked about, by the way, when you were talking about your family, is that there was this radical candor that, just saying what needs to be said. And because, I've also observed this in my personal experiences that, in North America, everything is like a sandwich feedback. It's like,
oh, yes.
Oh, you're doing this really amazing thing. Maybe you should explore this. And then, but that thing is amazing.
That has been the biggest cultural shift for me. Yeah. The only, other than my European English versus American English.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's even when, and that's another thing that I've noticed, not only in families, in like my personal life, but even the professional life. When I was in India, we would just be like, what the fuck is this?
I think it's a cultural thing in India.
And then even in that context, it wasn't like you are a piece of, you suck, but it was like, oh, okay, the thing that I'm doing, it doesn't work. So he's like, the feedback is cutting right through all of that fluffiness and saving time. You get to the answer faster because somebody's like, you trust the other person. That psychological safety is sort of there by default, because even your parents will give you that kind of feedback. They'll be like, "Oh, you're putting on so much weight," or they'll be like, "You didn't get as many marks as their son." So it's like that radical candor is just like in our culture. But I think it just gets to the root cause a little bit faster. I don't know. These are just anecdotal personal experiences, I guess.
And I want to agree with you, like totally come from a similar background. One thing that I'd love to share with you is we learned, and now I learned, and I teach this, train people on this framework, and all kudos um, to the coaches who taught me this. I will share the crux, how to provide feedback, how to have those challenging conversations, because irrespective of the industry, organization, role that you are, you will end up being in a situation where you want to tell somebody you suck, or you did this wrong, or it hurt me, kind of a thing, right? How do you say that? Other than this has worked so well for me. Like, other than keeping your emotions in check, you prepare for this conversation. Like, I prepare for this conversation beforehand. I just don't go in all emotional and say it. I prepare in my head, like, okay, so this is what hurt me. Let's say we were in a meeting, somebody said this, and he's or she is repeating a certain behavior. Let's take an example of, if I'm sharing a thought, an idea, the other person raises their hand and is talking, cuts me off. The way I'm taking it might be different than intention versus impact, right? So I focus on the impact and the intention both. So if I have to give feedback to somebody, first I will prepare in my mind objectively, keeping the emotions on the sides. Like, there's one thing that is observation, there's other thing that is assumption. I might assume that that person doesn't like me, wants to show me down, wants to look better than me, but they're all assumptions. The observation here is, this person is interrupting me. So I try and keep focus on the observations, objectivity, like the facts, like this is what I have observed. And then I focus on the impact on me. And I don't forget to mention that, yes, your intention might not have been this, but the impact on me, it's all about me. Now, even if I want to tell them that you are wrong, I'm not saying you are wrong. I'm saying that the impact on me is this. It's like, I feel X, Y, and Z. I feel like you are cutting me off. I feel like I'm being seen in a different light, or whatever I want to tell them in that context. But the impact on me is this. And then I pause to listen to what they have to say, because they definitely have to say. And I will be very honest and transparent here with you, Paul. One, it's not easy to do this, but it's very helpful. Two, not everybody is prepared for this kind of conversation, and not everybody is good taking feedback. So whenever you say something, they will become defensive. They will say no, and they will not take it. But this really works most of the time, because now you are opening up in a way that it's about me, the impact on me. I know that may not have been your intention. So you make them a little bit more comfortable. Like, this is what I'm observing. This is, like how I feel about it. Is there anything like going on? What's going on with you? Have I done something? Again, it might sound like I'm putting myself down, but I'm coming from that humble and curious space, because I want to understand, is there something I am doing that is triggering this reaction in him, or action in him or her? So you want to listen to them, give them that space, and then then I propose, like, can we try this? Like, the impact on me is, I feel like I'm not able to complete my thought. I'm not able to complete the message I'm trying to give, or the idea I'm trying to share. So can we, for a few days or a few weeks, try that when I'm speaking, you don't interrupt. You wait for me to finish. And then keep that feedback channel on. It's not a once and done thing because I might be taking to like I'm yapping away right now. I might be talking too much, and that person might be feeling, oh, we have only so much time. We need to finish one, two, three things. This is sandwiching in one way. Another way of sandwiching is give good feedback, then throw the bomb and then say, well, you are doing really great. Another way is sandwiching in a way that the other emotions are out. The other person feels psychologically safe and not attacked upon, even though they are the worst people you may not want to talk about, the toughest people. But if you go from this perspective, it always helps open that person up to listen to you. And once they're open, they will lean in. They would want to do what you are talking to them because that's where you have built a connection. If you can't do that, then
Wow. I mean, I took away a lot of stuff. I like one thing that you talked about right up front was the fact that you're not going in emotional, overly emotional. So you're sort of looking at emotional regulation as the underlying, and then you're deploying a lot of cognitive empathy and self-awareness, sort of being aware even before you go into the conversation. So I think one thing that you sort of hinted at was maybe like sleeping over it or taking a day to really like, yeah. And then, the part that really sort of separates this from like a typical regular conversation is that because you're deploying that cognitive empathy, you're also not judging the person based on your observation. You're like, okay, this is an assumption. I don't know what the reason behind what this person's behavior. What's the supposition behind this? And so let me just help this person understand how their behavior is impacting me.
yes,
But by
yes,
by talking about your story, you're not making them defensive. You're like, oh wait, I'm making this other person feel that way. And maybe they didn't even realize they were, because maybe they don't have
yes,
self-awareness, or maybe they don't have that level
yes.
of cognitive empathy.
Yes, and I'm jumping up saying yes because that's exactly the example that I was sharing was a true example. And when I had this conversation, the person had no awareness that they were doing this. So there was no like hidden intentions there. That person had no clue that was happening and that how bad I was feeling constantly for weeks. And then one day I decided to talk to that person. But another thing that I do, especially if this is like not too bad or tough of a conversation, like where I'm sharing that you're interrupting and this is happening, but there are worse conversations that one might need to have. There could be much more challenging because the person you are going to talk to is a senior leader. You have to give them this feedback. They are right there and you're right here. So there's obviously like that gap is there. Your confidence is not there. Or another example situation could be this feedback that you want to give could be about certain something that is so close to you that you're super emotional about it. And every time you want to talk about it, emotions flow out. So how do you tackle that? How do you gain that confidence? How do you cut across those emotions? Talk to an empty chair, really. And we've had trainings, formal training. Like I've been trained on giving feedback. We were made like there was an empty chair that was kept in the room. And like this small group of us coaches who was being trained, like for executive coaching and all, they said, imagine that person is sitting here, bring up the toughest conversation you want to have with them and the real one that you will have in the next 1 or 2 weeks with them, which you have been holding off. I have seen people cry to that empty chair, like shivering because emotion, they could visualize that. And once you've done that, when you've spoken to an empty chair, that you've crossed the first hump of fear, of lack of confidence, of emotions bursting out. Even if you feel like crying, It's okay to cry. People say, you should not cry, but it's an emotion. If you don't experience an emotion, it will come out in one way or the other. It's better that you experience in a safe environment. And that safe environment could be your bedroom where nobody is looking at you. Put a chair, talk to that empty chair, get over that hump. And when you are talking, you hear yourself, you understand the words that you're using. And again, I will go back to intention versus impact. Your intention might be to give just this feedback, but the words you are using might have a different impact.
Okay. So one thing was, I think you touched on, is that how do you deal with the power dynamic in the conversation? Especially if you're managing up, if you're talking to a boss, to how you deal with emotional, how do you emotionally regulate yourself? How do you prepare for that? And then the sort of activity that you described was very interesting, because I know that therapists, what they will do is they'll say, okay, what's that voice in your head? Let's put a label on it and imagine that person, and let's put that voice in your head in the room. What is this voice telling you? And so it really helps you sort of detach yourself from that voice. And it's like, I think, tools that therapists use to help people navigate some of the conversations they're having with their internal stakeholders.
Yes, you're right.
So I found like that to be very interesting, even how you're doing that in the context of like the professional world and the corporate world, is you're labeling, you're putting that person there, and you're having that almost like, what do you call it? Not like a lived experience, but helping them go through the motions of that experience in advance of that experience. The point that you made at the beginning of this conversation, how you were talking to the example in terms of when you were in college, you don't get attached to the work. Just like that, you don't get attached to your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions, because that's not who you are. Your opinions and your knowledge is not you. They're a part of you. They're not, of course, mutually exclusive, but your thoughts don't define you, because your thoughts could change. Your behavior could change. Your ideas could change. So I think that detachment from the work like reflects and echoes in all these other facets that you're speaking to.
Am I hearing a very, very spiritual thought right here?
Maybe.
Yeah, I am. Right? The thoughts are not you. The emotions are not you.
You know what?
That's how the spirituality, we can give it a term, but this is an aspect of it. Interrelated, how it helps in your day-to-day life, or how you can be spiritual in terms of understanding these aspects. The self-awareness is an aspect of spirituality. Detachment is an aspect of spirituality. Understanding that your emotions and your thoughts are not you, and how you can then address what's going on. Like just the concept of understanding the thoughts and emotions are not you is an aspect of spirituality.
I mean, I've also been reading some books on epigenetics. There's these Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Bruce Lipton. They talk about how, this is like a full whatever, but the short version of it is that down to the molecule, down to the atom, we're just energy. There's actually 99% just energy. And in that fabric, and when we're growing up and we're in the mother's womb all the way till the age of 7, we are in like this state. So for a child, there's no distinction in the brain between reality and imagination. And we're constantly absorbing the environment. And as we grow up, whatever we've experienced till the age of 7, so it's like you have a abundant environment, versus you have a scarce, you can't do this, you don't deserve this, versus do whatever you want, fail at stuff, and you're not punished for that. So a child, depending on where it's born, is going to have such different ways of looking at life. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's set in stone. It's recorded into your subconscious. And, it's like your subconscious is dictating 99% of your behavior. Consciously, it's It's like the example that they constantly use is that, when you drive from point A to point B, sometimes you don't even remember what you saw on the way because your subconscious was driving you from point A to point B.
Yes. So true. And all the aspects you touched upon, Paul, we were talking about detaching or being aware of your thoughts, your emotions, and everything that we've touched upon so far. There's this element of emotional intelligence that is key to everything. Like the more self-aware you are, the more emotional growth, emotional intelligence you are developing, and vice versa. The more emotionally intelligent you are becoming by consciously practicing, it doesn't happen on its own. There's a conscious effort that goes into it. But the more emotionally intelligent you're becoming, the more self aware you are. That's a key skill to being a coach, a transformation coach, a change management coach. Emotional intelligence will help you connect to people because that's what you are dealing with. You are talking to people, and your emotional intelligence and that quality and level of emotional intelligence will help you be tangibly at the level of a coaching and the quality of coach that you are to people, which will then translate into the work that you're doing, the change that you're bringing, helping them go from point A to point B. What is the quality of their journey? And will they stick to that point B or not? And they will stick only because the quality was good. So everything kind of ties to one another. Emotional intelligence of a coach who's supporting, emotional intelligence of the leadership, the understanding, the tactics that we talked about. But there's a whole aspect of emotional intelligence to this when you're dealing with people. Reading the room when you're facilitating, having these challenging conversations, when you're presenting, you're reading the room. All those things that we touched upon is our branches.
So 3 thoughts based on what you said. Number one is I definitely want to, and this is a good segue to actually jump into the coaching side of things and learn a bit more about that. And so, but before we do that, the 2 things that I want to sort of call out. One is a lot of times it's just like when to talk and when to shut up, and when to just be like listening to understand and not listening for cosmetic reasons. Like
Deep listening.
Yeah, it's just like, this look that we all practice. Yeah. But all we're ready to just say what we want to say, and we're not really listening to what the person's saying. Anyways, so that's one part. The knowing when to talk and when to shut up, and having emotional intelligence in becoming more coach-like. We are going to talk a little bit more about being coach-like. The other final point that I wanted to sort of call out, or something that I'm taking away from all these different things that you're saying, is that you're being very mindful of not only the people that you're talking to, but yourself, what's being said versus what's being heard, and then even in the way that you're sort of looking at, that feedback that you're doing that we talked about a little bit earlier. So all of these things are sort of woven together. So a lot of good stuff to take away, especially for the audience listening. Now, before we actually jump into the coaching part, the final thing I want to sort of call out is, so you did talk about at some point about this book that you read, Who Moved My Cheese. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we jump into the coaching part of the segment of the conversation?
Yes, Spencer Johnson. I remember talking to you about this earlier. So when I was in art college, somebody introduced me to this book, Who Moved My Cheese? And It's a very famous book written by Spencer Johnson. A lot of people have read this. I'll just share like a one liner crux. It's a story about four mice who are in a maze looking for their cheese. There's somebody, and the attitude and the personality perspective towards that cheese, like, I will sit here and my cheese is here, it's not going to go anywhere, versus, when once my cheese is moved. What does it mean to move the cheese is really the change that's coming to my life. I'm sitting in my comfort zone, and then suddenly that thing is taken away. So now I'm not. It's resonated with me at many levels, past, present, and future. I will put it that way. It resonated with me in that aspect. Growing up, we were moving all the time. So that prepared me. The first time it happened, it hit me. I still remember my first friend from little school, that little girl who was my friend. When I left that school, it hurt. I remember that face. I remember that child's name. I never met her again, but there was a pain in my heart that I felt that I'm leaving my friend. Goodbye was tough. But that was the only time I felt it. Everything that around me kept moving, kept changing. Very early in my life, I was that mouse who was ready to look for where my cheese is going to be. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, like I don't remember the last time I was in my comfort zone. Imagine like this is like a circle and you're inside that comfort zone. And once it breaks, you're like, what's going on? But actually, people feel fear, people feel other emotions. But actually, if you objectively look at it, outside your comfort zone is learning zone. Remember how when we go to school, we are learning new things. We are not comfortable, but we are learning new things in life. Challenges that we have, situations that come to us, that challenges that are not comfortable. There's always a lesson to be learned from every single situation, challenge, and things that we face. So outside of comfort zone is learning zone. So I have with that book, like how it really shaped my personality was consciously I started living in the learning zone. I call it learning zone. My coaches. So I didn't know that it could be called as a learning zone until I was in a training. And my coach was talking about this. And I was like, oh, so this is called learning zone. But I have been in that always. And that's how I have always operated, but subconsciously, not consciously. Up until the time when I was reading this book and it connected the dots for me that, okay, now in the past that has happened to me. It happened to me and I adapted to it. But now I'm in the present. This is what's happening to me around me. And I would love to be that mouse. I want to be that mouse. I am that mouse who is not complacent, who is not just okay with where my cheese is and where I'm sitting, because the only thing that's constant is change. Very broken, beaten record, old saying, but it's true. Only thing that's constant is change. Everything is changing in every concept, in every aspect. I could talk about days, I could talk about seasons, I could talk about my present and next second and the next minute. Things around us change. So eventually, it could be a job, it could be my personal situation, it could be something that I want, whatever my objective is, things will change. So, how do I keep myself in that state? And this perspective, this attitude that this book kind of hit me in the right spot, I would say. And I'm so glad that I read it when I did. That, again, I will say it has been the reason I'm not surprised that I'm in this role. Like 10 years ago, if you asked me, like, what would you be? Or what would you want your career to be? I was in advertising, thriving, enjoying myself, doing my campaigns with Bollywood celebrities, traveling around the world, loving it, living the glamorous spotlight life. I didn't even know what was transformation. in corporate culture or business. But guess what? Here I am. And and funny story I'll share with you. As a kid, there was this serial that used to come on TV. Serial is the series of episodes, like how we have series, Netflix series, and all. We At that time there was no YouTube, internet. We had TV, and once a week we would get these episodes. We so there was this, I don't know if you know about it, but Udan was a serial that used to come at that time. Many years ago, I'm talking about when I was a little kid. So that was a story about this young woman who wants to be a police officer and want to serve for her country in the forces and the services. And the effort, determination she had, the effort she made. Nothing I remember from the serial. The only one scene that I remember is she was trying to scale a wall. And she tried and she tried and she succeeded. That's the only memory of that serial I have. And all I remember is as a child, I wanted to be a police officer, like Kiran Bedi. I wanted to serve for my country. I wanted to do these, I was a tough girl. I wanted to fight. I never thought I was going into advertising. Life happened. Whatever I did, I made choices to pursue my hobby as my professional education, and then pursue that education as my career for a certain amount of time. And now that I'm not formally pursuing it, I still pursue it on, I've shared so many examples how I leverage my learnings and experiences. But here was this girl who wanted to be a police officer, became an artist, and now as a transformation coach. I would wonder how that happened, but now that I'm here today, I can look back and I can connect the dots. Everything that happened in my life brought me to a place where I was so comfortable with change that I decided to help people being comfortable with change.
By the way, when you were watching that woman try and scale the wall, what was about that moment that spoke to you in that moment in time?
I don't know. I don't know what was I thinking at that moment. I don't remember the face of the actress. I don't remember anything else because it was a scene from her back and she was trying to scale the wall. But now when you're asking me, I will try to share with you what resonates with me now about that when I brought it up. What an old memory I shared with you. A challenge in front of you and you making an attempt to overcome that challenge and not succeeding, but not giving up. Resiliency, she was resilient. The entire being of her was resilient. And that's what I remember from that. If I say what I remember about that character, whoever that character was, it was her being resilient, mentally strong, even if not physically as strong, mentally strong, mental resilience, not giving up. And I think that must have been what it was because I was a child, maybe 7, 8 years old at that time. I can't recall, but something that I see myself have done in my life, always continuing to do that in this role. We meet with so much resistance in this role. A change manager, a change agent, evangelist, a transformation coach, whatever you want to call it, different names, but they're all doing the same job at the end of the day, bringing a change to people. And there's an inertia to change. People don't want to do things differently because they're so comfortable doing things the way they are. They are in their comfort zone. You are breaking their comfort zone and pulling them out. Let's get into this learning zone. They don't want to. There'll be a lot of kicking and screaming and shouting and tantrums. Resiliency is very important.
By the way, just to and I probably don't. This is like a stupid question, but is the learning zone and the growth mindset the same thing, or are those different things? I don't know.
Growth mindset would be my willingness to stay out of my comfort zone and to stay in the learning zone. Learning zone is where the growth is, for that matter. The growth mindset is my willingness to be there.
Okay, I think this is a good segue into sort of the final big segment of the podcast, which is talking about coaching, how potentially to help people get into the growth mindset or help them see that they should be in the learning zone. But I think the example that I want to use to sort of start or kick off this conversation is, let's say, for the audience listening, I'm going to give you two scenarios. And I'm going to use an extreme example, like fringe example, because then, it's easier to work backwards and see how that would make it applicable to even a common or a simpler situation. So let's say you have an org and, you have young leadership, maybe like a startup, and they're 2 years old, 3 years old. And because they don't have that level of, legacy or that understanding of how organizations are run, people management, they don't have those traditional stereotypical roles or experiences. They're just so keen and excited about building something. So what happens is that, they're trying to be like this flat organization. And so at the end, it comes back to some of the examples that we were taking. So in those kind of environments is you don't have people talking to each other. There's like egos, that I know more, or people are not talking to each other. And there's a huge conflict and everybody's more interested in let me just do something and figure it out. They have that kind of mindset. They're more stuck in execution and the initiatives versus thinking how all of it is connected back to the big strategy. And this is basically some of the stuff that you were describing, but I'm just contextualizing it in a startup environment versus an enterprise environment. And now you have two people that hopefully, of course, you can add more color and more perspective. Of course, that would be way more help. But I'm really curious how you would look at somebody who might be in management and looking at all of this dysfunction and who might want to be proactive and learn from this conversation. Okay, how do I navigate through this and help leadership see this, manage up that you were talking about? And then maybe somebody who in that leadership position and they're like, oh shit, I started something, but it looks like it's all haywire. Now, how do I get people to line up and buy into maybe the strategy and how would that percolate downwards? So maybe those two sort of personas, how would you deal with them? Obviously, you've touched on this, but I think this one example will really speak to the coaching side of things, facilitation, and then how do you deal with those complexities of people, disjointed, not all the stuff that you talked about. I think it would summarize in this case study.
So understanding if I get the question right. So let's take the first persona where, you're a coach and you want to help the middle management, want to help the senior leadership kind of navigate through this dysfunctional org and bring them all together. So that's the one aspect. Let's talk about this aspect first. So what are some of the qualities? I want to touch upon that first. What are the qualities of a good coach? Why I want to touch about before getting into tactical what they should do is because these qualities will determine how you address a certain situation. What you should do here will be different in different situations. So your actions may be different, but the qualities would be emotional intelligence is something that we touched upon, self-awareness.
So, so navigating through this dysfunctional org and you're trying to speak to different people, one person is being the executive and one person being in middle management, and you're helping them get buy-in and alignment internally across the org. And when you're going through these phases and steps, you're actually putting on multiple hats, one being that of an advisor from change management perspective, but also as a coach in helping them, get to their own answers. So now in that duality, what are the things that you might be doing differently, and how would you approach these?
Yeah, sure. So let me clarify. If there is a difference in an advisor and a coach, and I would put it this way, anyone in any role can be a coach. Advisor would be somebody who's in a position, who has a subject matter expertise of a certain process or a certain subject. And then they bring in their subject matter expertise to propose ideas, thoughts, solutions to current problems in that area based on their experience and knowledge. So that's where an advisor comes into the picture. Can be advisor, can whatever the title may be called, but when you're doing it, could be a consultant, right? So you can be a consultant from an external organization to your client's organization. So your title might not be an advisor, and you might think, oh, I'm not an advisor, but that's basically the role that you're playing. You're coming in as a SME to understand their current state, the challenges, and provide solutions and ideas to address that. While you're doing that, you are also constantly shifting hats of a trainer, a coach, a facilitator. And the reason I call out these is there's an overlap, yet there are distinctions in these roles that you play, situational distinctions. When you're a facilitator, how do you want to show up? When you're a coach, how do you want to show up? And I can touch upon these in my response to kind of connect the dots. I will touch upon a distinction when it comes to coach versus a SME in an organizational context, which may be true for some organizations, may look differently, but I'll just share one aspect of it in a minute. But when you're coming in as a SME coach, player coach, you can call yourself, because you're also in action with them. You know how the captain of a Indian cricket team is, or any other sports team is. The captain is also a coach, may not be the formal coach outside. So I will take that example for a coach and a SME. So. mm, so when you are in that role, you're playing with your team. You're in there, but you're also coaching, right? So your biases is important. Feedback. Be open to feedback and be aware and have your tips and tricks in place on how to provide feedback. Some people are direct, some are indirect. So if you're talking to a direct person in a very indirect manner, that person will be scratching his head thinking, okay, so what really should I take away from this conversation? The objective of my conversation with any person would be that they understand what I'm trying to tell them. The message has to be clear. Now, I need to read and understand. That's where emotional intelligence also plays a role, right? I need to understand what kind of person am I talking to? Indirect, direct? How should I communicate? In an organization, a coach is somebody, a true coach is somebody who is not, and I want people to take it with a pinch of salt because it can be different in different situations. But a coach is somebody who would not be really hands on doing that activity, but that person is building the capability within that group, that or the person, depends, right? But that coach is really building the capability. And a SME is somebody who has a subject matter expertise of a particular process area.
So I'm so glad that you clarified one, what is the difference between a SME and a coach, and how potentially a SME can put on the hat of a coach, but a coach necessarily doesn't have to be a SME, and the coach doesn't get into the trenches. So they might stay a few steps away from getting their hands dirty and really just helping build that capability that you talked about. Now, sort of coming back full circle, and I'm so glad that you actually did a full summarization of the whole conversation with by describing the distinction between a coach and a SME, which was super helpful. And we sort of reiterated some points, but I think it sort of cemented all the things that we talked about. Now, so now coming back to the example of, this dysfunctional startup, where we have this person in middle management and one person in the executive position in this predicament. Now, of course, we want to get into all the steps, 8, 9, 10, but maybe what are some of the initial 1 or 2 steps that they can take in terms of personally how they can help navigate some of those difficult situations? And maybe even if you want to throw in how they can engage with an external resource and what might be a way to sort of even go about doing that.
Actually, I'll start with the second part first, where how or why or should they engage with an external resource. And I always think that when you are in the weeds, sometimes you need a pair of fresh eyes, you need a fresh perspective, especially somebody who's has been experienced in that space. So you can have an internal person. Like I am not an external consultant to my organization. I'm an internal employee, but this is my role. So the leaders, the organization, the owner, sponsor, whoever, can take that call, whether they want to call an external consultant or have like an internal. First, they need to identify, do they have that capability within the organization, or do they need somebody external? So that's how they should go start. Like that's a good way to start thinking about it. What are my capabilities? Where I need support? Then engage internally or externally. Even set up a transformation office if needed. That's a whole big thing, like how to do it. But at a very, very high level, they want to understand who is that potential third party, internal, external, who can help me with this perspective of identifying the entire space, dysfunctionality, the gaps. Basically, I will look at it as an entire process and where are these process gaps and how to then address those. So there will be a proper strategic, let's say, manner of doing that. What do you want to address first? So this is one of the first things they may want to look into. Second is again, I would just go back to objectives and why. Like there's dysfunction. So understanding the root cause of the dysfunction is also very important. Now, this can be seen in 2 ways, macro and micro. So if there is this dysfunctional organization, what are the reasons? What are the root causes? Because dysfunctionality is not a root cause, it's a symptom. So what is the root cause for that? And then addressing the root cause.
When somebody is looking, let's say they don't have that skill set in-house and they're looking to find an external person to come in and help them. And now there's a sea of people. Is there maybe one thing that they can look at as a measure of assurance that this quality must be in that person to know that we're getting the right person? Because there's a lot of people who talk or who might have like a beautiful website, but when it comes to actually delivering on this, they might not be there. So that's the first question. Is how do you identify a good SME or person to help them with this? One quality, maybe you don't have to go into the whole depths of it, but and then the second part to that is when you're talking about knowing what the challenge is, isn't that something that the coach or this person that they're looking for externally help them come and figure out to uncover the real challenge?
Yes, that can be part of it. If they're not engaging somebody, this is what they can do. But what is that one quality? Instead of sharing that one quality, I will share what I would do if I were in the shoes of a person who is looking out to find an external support. Irrespective of what websites they are or not, I would go after their success stories and experience and validate and authenticate those success stories. Like, are they authentic? What they're saying, their legacy, where are they coming from? What have they done? It's important. And when I say legacy, it's not like they must be a big name or anything. But if they are claiming to have done something, what is the credibility of that? And if they've done it, they will do it for you. And the second thing is you're bringing in somebody, but you're not providing them support, is setting them up for failure. So if you're bringing in somebody to do that, you must support them. If they're even Because they will come and they will show you a mirror that you will not like. You will not like what you see.
This is shooting from the hip that you were talking about earlier. Okay, so this is fantastic. Now, if we were to get into the absolute final last leg of this segment, which would be now, what are some of the maybe steps 1 and 2, actionable steps or things maybe thinking about or doing from that executive's position or that management position that they should explore outside of now getting that external person? Let's say they're not getting that external person, what could they do?
Irrespective of the external support or not, again, I will put my perspective to it. What they should do can be debatable from a different perspective, different organizations' experience. But my perspective, if I were in those shoes, would be one, to understand my objectives and to see, are my teams moving in that direction? Do they know what my objectives are? So now, once that, right? The second thing is understand the root cause of dysfunctionality. I go back to that. Like what? And this can be like a mammoth of an exercise because there could be thousands of root causes and you cannot attack all of them. But then you want to understand what are the top 2 or 3 things that you want to address. So identify the root cause. The third thing is come across as an empathetic leadership who's supportive and not just top down. When the leadership is coming across as that, the teams would be more open. And we've talked about this in abundance about empathy, psychological safety, and all those things. So this functionality is a symptom of certain root causes. And if we want to address those, we must support the change that is going to address those root causes. And I will just leave you with one thought and leave everybody with one thought. Whatever we are doing, we are dealing with people. So we must remember that. And when we are dealing with people, there are emotions, there are a whole lot of other complexities that we've talked about. And be cognizant of, are we doing it to them or with them? If we are doing things to people, that's much more uphill battle than if we are involving them, we are doing with them. That is a much happier path to take.
Love it. Love it. I'm just blown away. I've learned so much in this entire conversation. And I feel I don't even need to summarize because you literally did that with the example that you took in terms of setting the distinction between a coach and a SME. I think you touched on all the sort of different facets and pieces and elements that we talked about across this podcast. And even now, for that person listening who is potentially in that dysfunctional sort of situation and context where people are not talking. So you have to really look at some of the advice that Isha has given from the lens of, looking at those causes, prioritizing because you can't do everything, and then really having that empathy and supportive leadership and supporting an external person if you bring them in, because you don't want to set up that external person for failure because ultimately, it is going to affect your outcomes. Okay, so now I have a super fun activity, which will literally take like 1 minute. And then after that activity, what we're going to do is just have you give the audience any final lingering thoughts, any message that you want to leave the audience with, and then finally how they can get in touch with you. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Okay, so the activity is 3001 questions all about me. And what you have to do is pick a number between 1 and 3001. And I'm going to read out that question. And hopefully, if you're comfortable with that question, you can answer it.
All right, let's do it. You remind me of Karan Johar, Coffee with Karan. Okay, what's my number? 2,349.
Okay, 2,349.
Yes.
2,349. Have I ever had an operation?
If root canals are considered an operation, Yes. I have so many of them.
So you've actually walked away in life unscathed, just root canals then. That's cool. Interesting to
So
know.
far, so good.
That's good. Touch wood. Okay, so now, any final message for the audience listening, and how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. I thought you would ask me more questions. I was ready.
Everybody gets one.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yes, I mean, irrespective of the role you're in, the organization, industry, culture, country, couple of things that have helped me be successful in what I do, where I am in life, personal, professional. One thing is identifying my objective and having focus on my objective, never losing focus of my objective. And then I will find a way to get there. So that I think I talked enough about OKRs, objective key results in organizations, personal life, tiding the way, like riding with a surfboard on a tidal wave, but identifying what my objective is, where I want to go, focusing on that. Second thing is resiliency. It's so important because if you really want to go do something, it's you will meet challenges, resistance. Resiliency is one thing that is very important in this role as well. In change management, you meet resistance all the time at all levels. You have to be resilient. Courage to be resilient and speak up is also important. And I would just say, always remember that you're dealing with people in whatever you're doing, and be self-aware of how you show up every single day. And one challenge that I will leave you all with is every day look back at yourself the previous day and see, did you get better than what you were yesterday? How can I get better tomorrow than what I am today? I am my biggest competitor. I am my biggest critic in a good way. Every day I look at myself and I ask myself, am I better than what I was yesterday? And even if it is very tiny one thing, I'm getting better every single day. Continuous improvement mindset.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. And where
Thank
can
you.
people connect with you?
LinkedIn. You can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Paul, feel free to share my profile.
For the audience listening, I will drop Isha's LinkedIn profile into the show notes and you can reach out to her. But do give some context, and before reaching out to her, let her know that you were listening to her on the podcast. And thank you very much. This was a fantastic conversation. We'll definitely bring you back for round 2 and explore some of those subjects. This was super fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here on this podcast. I enjoyed thoroughly. And thank you for getting in touch with me again.
Yeah, no, this was a good decision.